Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Dev to Dev, the podcast about everyday video game developers and why they do what they do every day. Time for another episode with another person I'd never met before, Brandon Van Haren. He was kind enough to reach out, having listened to some episodes of the show. We connected and I was like, do you want to come on the show? And he was like, sure, and here we are. Really enjoyed this conversation. Brandon has a great perspective. We have some overlap in both location and time spent at studios, which you'll hear about when we reflect on what it's like to spend so long somewhere and move on. Really interesting insight there, I think. And I loved Brandon's perspective on patience and transitioning into a role where maybe you have to go from being a leader to taking feedback and how that can be challenging. Really, I think, useful lessons and useful insight into the process of working your way into games and growing in games. So I love this conversation. As always, Dev to Dev is available all the usual places, and especially on Patreon, where patrons can get access to all of Season 1 and the video versions of Season 2. Please subscribe if you can, it definitely helps me out. I also make clips and share those in the usual places, LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube. I'd appreciate likes and shares there, that really helps. Check out my recent appearance on the Retro Hour podcast with Dan and Ravi, talking about my journey through video games. Really fun conversation, love that podcast. And also my regular appearance on the DLC Patreon with the show that Christian Spicer and I do called Feeling This, all about the mechanical feel of games. The other passion that I have, making games feel great. Please support that podcast. Love DLC, it's my favourite gaming related podcast on the internet. Thank you for all the support. Please keep it coming. Please like and share this with anyone you think might be interested. Without further ado, let's sit back and listen in to another episode of Dev to Dev with Brandon Van Haren. Well, yes, thank you for making the time. Again, we've never met, so I'm excited to get to know you on the podcast. I've done a lot of that with Season 2, and it's been really fun. And although there is some overlap in where we worked, like we were just saying at the start, we never actually met. But yeah, I'm excited to explore your journey and how you got where you got and where you are now. But I always like to kick it off with my favourite first question: what first inspired you about video games?
I mean, when I was growing up as a young boy, playing Nintendo Entertainment System with my older brother, playing games like Contra and, Legend of Zelda, of course, Mario Brothers. Me and my older brother, we'd always play a game called Life Force, which is like I think it was like the second game to Gladius. I forget the name of it, but, it had the old Konami code just like Contra did. We'd spend hours at that thing whenever we could, playing together. At first, he would do the old trick where, you unplug the second controller on your little brother, make him pretend, think that he's playing with you. But, I just grew up playing Nintendo games, and then we got a Super Nintendo, and I've always just loved them, everything about them, the storytelling, things like level design I was into when I was real young. I didn't even know it. I'd be making, my own Mario levels on pieces of paper and stuff like that, showing them to my mom. So ever since I can remember, I've always been interested in video games.
Wow, okay, so it sounds like they hooked you, right away, like when you first started playing them. Do you think how big a part of that was your brother, or were you just magnetized to them straight away anyway?
I mean, he was probably a big part of it, a big influence. Without him, I wouldn't have been able to understand the games as well as I did, or get as far in them. Without his skill level, being a couple years older than me, he was obviously a lot better. So, we'd beat the games together, and that was really satisfying. He's not really into them anymore. He went a different path. But he helped kick off my love for games for sure. And he still plays to this day, but not as much.
Right. And where was this? Where did you grow up?
In a little town in Potomac, Maryland. So Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Okay. Yeah,
it's right outside of DC. Yep, East Coast, right outside of DC. Yep.
Got it. Okay.
I guess it's not a little town anymore. It's probably a big place at this point, big and busy.
When you were there as well. Did you grow up around games? Were there friends? Do you have a big friend group that were gaming? Was there a lot of gaming at school?
I mean, at the time there was no internet or anything like that. It was all Nintendo and Super Nintendo. But yeah, all my friends played. Go over to a friend's house to play Contra all the time. We weren't allowed to have that game actually, so I had to go to a friend's house to play it. So, but all my friends had Nintendos, and anytime I'd go over there. The first thing I'd want to do is go sit down and play games with them, explore the games that they had.
Right. And you sort of mentioned, Contra and Life Force, so kind of arcadey games. Was that what you were drawn to, or were there, other types of games that you played?
Well, you mentioned arcadey type of games. When I was a kid, there were arcades all over the place. Especially, there was a really big one down where I grew up called the Rio at the time. It was the whole upper level of this almost shopping mall was just a massive arcade, so you could spend hours in there. And then my father was a policeman at the time, so he'd work kind of a side job working security for the arcade. So we'd go there all the time and just get free tokens to play video games for hours on end. It was pretty amazing. So that probably helped inspire my, and keep my love for video games going when I was able to just pump the almost predatory arcade games into, for free for hours on end. It was awesome.
Yeah, what a joy to be able to just play arcade games basically for free. That's so cool. No wonder why you were kind of addicted, especially arcades were such a huge aspiration, right? The quality of arcade games versus the home ports there was such a disparity there, so it's fun to be able to play them. Yeah, okay. So arcade games kind of pulled you in, the kind of Twitch experiences.
Yeah, I mean the home experience, of course, it lives on to this day. Everybody's playing games at home, mostly over the internet now, but the social aspect back then was going to the arcade and not playing with random strangers, playing Mortal Kombat, playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and X-Men, cooperative titles and stuff, and watching people put the quarters up there to mark their turns and stuff. The whole, experience at that time was a different beast that I don't think people understand to this day. It was pretty fun.
Agreed. And it seems like the sort of social side of it, both playing with your brother, playing with friends, playing arcades, that was a big part of the draw as well, yeah?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I like multiplayer games to this day, competitive and cooperative. I also like single player titles as well. Story driven games is probably what I'm mostly drawn to. But there is that, the social aspect of playing video games with people is also a heavy draw for me as well. So I love playing competitive games based off of that social aspect when I was a kid, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you mentioned kind of making your own levels and on graph paper, I guess, or something like. Did you have a concept of being a game designer at that point, or were you just kind of so inspired?
I had no idea when I was a kid. I just loved, I think it was like Super Mario World when that came out. It kind of moved to like a top-down three-dimensional map, and I was really like blown away by the concept of that, moving around a map and entering levels. So I'd make those, I'd draw those three-dimensional Mario-esque like levels just on paper and color them and show them to my mom, and she'd tell me how great it was. But I had no idea that what I was actually doing was like, essentially level designing, my own little games. And when I think back on it now, I would actually make level design on paper and have my mom like, take the pencil and trace her way through the level and kind of role play it for her. So almost dungeon master it for her when I was a kid. So that's crazy that when you mentioned that, it's sparking all sorts of memories in my head, actually. So
I love that, though. You sort of found your own way of building your own version of Mario that you could get someone else to play and kind of test your. Was that? Can you sort of put your finger on? Was that just pure inspiration? Like what? Because not many people make that leap, right? That leap between, the digital thing they're playing and finding another interpretation of it on paper. Like, where did that come from? Did you do anything else like that? Was that inspired by anything else, or was it just came?
No, I don't know. We didn't get a lot. My parents actually restricted the time we had to play games around that time. So I think a lot of it was I just wanted to play some more, and that was my way of playing when I wasn't allowed to actually play. I'd make it myself, and through that I could continue to play.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you could stay connected to video games even if you couldn't actually play them. You could still, yeah, that's so cool. And then you went to kind of Montgomery College and then went on to the University of Baltimore. Did you at any point have any aspirations to make video games, or were video games just a passion that you enjoyed?
I actually didn't. I found myself, many years ago. I met my beautiful wife, and we ended up having a couple of kids. At a younger age, in our early 20s, and at the time I was running a bar. It worked out for where I was in my life at the time, and it was paying the bills. But I quickly saw that it wasn't gonna, lead me into anything else. It wasn't going to continue to support me as my kids got older. So I looked to see like what is it that, if I have an opportunity to go back to school and go get an education, what is it that I'd really want to do? Not just what can I be successful at or how can I make money, but what do I see myself doing? What do I want to do? What's going to really satisfy me? And I'd always loved games, so I was like, they offered a game design program at Montgomery College, which transferred into University of Baltimore. I was like, you know what, let me just go for it. So I entered in the program, and the rest is history.
Right, that's so cool. So you sort of actively sought out a way of turning your passion into a profession. And how was that? Like going from being just a player, right, to learning the bones of how games are made. Like, what was that experience? How did that feel?
Very eye-opening. Not knowing how to develop video games going into school. I had assumptions on how games were made, but it turns out all those assumptions were completely wrong. I thought everything was programmed at the time, even, like character models and such. I had no idea how those were made. So I went into my education with game design knowing very little about how video games are made. But, as I went through classes and started getting an education in game design, obviously it started making sense, and I understood the process, and I started looking at different venues and paths through the game design career field, and I went in thinking maybe level design was something I wanted to do, and world building, and putting art into worlds and setting up levels, kind of like as I did as a kid. But the path took me a different direction, which I loved and never looked back on.
Huh. So you specifically chose a game design course at Montgomery, yeah? Like, why game design? Why did you start there?
I mean, they offered the program, and I love video games, and I wanted to do something that I loved. I wanted to get a degree and start a career in something that I loved. So video games. That was the career field. What was the saying? Is do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So I loved video games and didn't want to work a day in my life. And turns out that saying is actually true. So
So true.
if you love video games and you're able to break in, then you'll never work a day in your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. But like, out of all the fields of game development, like, why did game design call to you?
I wasn't really confident in my art skills. I didn't have a ton of programming knowledge, so design seemed to be, I wanted to be the person that was making the calls. I looked at the time to all these big names in the industry, like back, at this time it was probably like Gears of War was a big deal. So I was looking at Cliffy B. One of my favorite games ever is, the original God of War series, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that was a big inspiration. So I'd look to see, the creative director at the time, and the creative director that made the sequels. And I was like looking at these big names going, that's kind of who I want to be. I want to be the person calling the shots and making the decisions on how the game direction goes. And, I'm not a director at this point, but, I still have, I'm still in the field of, designing portions of the game to that fit, what my vision is. And
Interesting. So sort of your angle was you want to be, the decision maker. You want to be someone that helps frame and shape and build the game from that sort of high level vision angle. That's cool. That was sort of the I love that you sort of saw that as a target as opposed to like, I mean, for me, it was like, I'm not smart enough to be a programmer. I have no art skills, so I guess I'll design, right? Because I like the way games function, but I love that your aspiration was like, no, I want to be the guy calling the shots.
mine was similar to yours, not a lot of programming technical knowledge at the time. And, I was confident in my art skills, but it wasn't like on a professional level. It wasn't something I really felt confident in taking to a professional level. So design kind of, I fell into design as kind of like a middle ground between, the technical aspects and the artistic aspect. So,
yeah, it makes sense. And so you sort of found your way through design. You mentioned kind of level design being an initial focus, but you sort of were pulled in different direction. Like, how did that happen?
Well, in my final time, the last couple of years at University of Baltimore, which had a game design program at the time. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. In my last couple of years of college, I had the opportunity to take a modding class, actually three semesters in a row, which wasn't the normal way that they offered that class. They switched up their program, and I was able to get into to a modding class three times in a row. So I was able to lead a group of students on 3 separate modding projects. We made a mod for Skyrim, for Portal, and then for Team Fortress 2. So we were using the Skyrim creation kit and the source engine to create these mods, and from there I was able to generate, put those mods on and start a portfolio. Show some examples of what I could do and my leadership skills. Having run the bar, I had some leadership skills with staff, you know what I mean? So I was kind of able to take the students and, I don't want to say get them under my wing, but, lead them in a direction where we could create something that everybody could use as a portfolio piece. Obviously I didn't do this alone. There were some other students I worked very closely with that are now in the industry also that were fantastic to work with. So once I was able to do that, then internship opportunity, came up for ZeniMax Online Studios, and as soon as I found out about it, I, applied, went in, interviewed, and got lucky enough for them to bring me on as an intern at ZeniMax.
That's cool. And so you kind of at the university, you kind of got that taste of being that kind of director, right? The sort of creative director almost. That must have been so cool. And I love that idea of kind of applying your real world skills you learned at a bar to managing and shepherding people. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, I guess something good had to come out of running the bar, you know what I mean? So
yeah, that's cool. And you also, I guess you also got to teach some kids as well at the Adventures with Robots.
Yeah, I did some just to give myself a little experience in, industry adjacent type work. I found a company, Adventures with Robots, that taught middle school kids and adolescents the basics programming with Scratch at the time. So I'd go in and we'd set up like Lego robots and program them. I have kids. I love kids. I love working with kids. So at the time, that was really cool. So I think I only spent about a year or two doing that. It was a great experience. Got to learn a little bit on my own also about, even though it was just Scratch, it was constantly, updating my own, kind of tool set, working alongside, people, especially kids at the time, and being able to teach them and help me develop a little bit more leadership capabilities as well, I think.
Yeah, and great opportunity to kind of, I guess, stretch your own game design skills by teaching them, right? It sort of forces you to kind of check your own knowledge if you're going to try and teach somebody how it works. It's always a good...
Yeah, it was cool also because, the things we were programming, if they were like Lego robots, it was actual tangible in-world things that you're programming, a little different from video games, but at the same time, there's parallels, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And so at this point, you've gone through college, you've got this intern role. Games are still a huge part of your life, I'm guessing. You're still,
of course,
still a big, yeah. And had you played anything? Had you played Elder Scrolls Online or anything that kind of ZOS was going to make before you got that role?
I mean, I had played numerous Elder Scrolls games previously, but I got the internship when ZOS was still in production for Elder Scrolls Online.
Of course, yeah, right.
They brought us in as just design interns, so they put us with the systems team at first. So it was working alongside systems designers, and at first it was intern level stuff. We were running around placing. There's a bunch of resource nodes in the game, and we'd go around and put those in the game. And the internship really helped me understand the process of real game design, how professionals work, and how to really like intermingle and work alongside other people in a design capacity. How to work with the other disciplines too, engineering and artists. How to talk to people in those roles and make, get things accomplished.
Yeah, and how did that compare to, by this point you spent a few years kind of in college and kind of learning the basics of game development, but now you're in an actual studio, like you say, you're working with the full gamut of a team. Like, how was that experience? How did it compare?
How did it compare to
the college experience, right?
Oh, right. Well, the college experience was, I was the leader in the college experience. I put myself in a leadership role and tried to roll with it. And moving from a leadership role to an internship was a little, there was a lot of lessons learned, let's say. You don't always make the best decisions moving into something like that. So I made a lot of mistakes at first, but it was very eye-opening to see, what what it's like to learn to work with industry professionals, and the more education I think came from those first couple years at ZeniMax than maybe my college career. Being in the thick of it and actually getting your hands on the tools and working alongside people.
Yeah, but I'm sure those years those 3 or 4 or 5 years in college gave you the grounding that allowed you to then really grab that intern role, by the scruff of the neck and kind of, get going. It gave you a good grounding, I would imagine, to get started.
Yeah, especially those mod, classes that I was able to take. Those really gave me like a lot of experience and allowed me to create something, numerous things that I could show to potential employers and get my foot in the door.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so you were intern for about a year, and as Elder Scrolls Online is being finished, right, is being put together. So how was that going through that? You're not only is it your first project, but it's also a massive, massive thing, right? Of an MMO that's being stood up. Yeah, like what was that like?
Well, being a fan of Elder Scrolls going in there and always wanting to see a multiplayer Elder Scrolls game, you go, it's kind of mind-boggling at first when I walk into the studio, like, wow, looking around me, all starstruck. Um, so again, it was really eye-opening, but experiencing how games are designed from before they're released and getting to hear feedback from not only just like internal testers but also hearing directors give feedback and making quick and fast changes with time limits and dates we had to hit at the time. It was very eye-opening to see how that process went down.
Yeah, yeah, and I would imagine you mentioned kind of feedback there, right? Such a crucial part of game design, especially if you're kind of in the thick of it. Like, how was that? I imagine when you're at college, there's a certain amount of feedback, of course, and it's important. And and like you mentioned, you were kind of also running some of those teams, but now you're at a big project. There's a lot of stuff on the line. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of input, and some of that from some very veteran people. Like,
Yeah, it humbles you for sure. Especially like going from the leadership role to person who's got to listen and address the feedback from directors, right? You gotta turn your confidence into being humble real fast. So I was the one giving direction at school, and all of a sudden I got to hear feedback from directors, and it was one hard lesson that I had to learn was how to accept that feedback from directors and not learn when to push back and when not to push back and when to just fire away and do what you need to do. So that was a big learning experience.
yeah, I can relate to that. I definitely remember. I can still vividly remember the point where on one of the projects I was working on, the creative director just was like, "No, we're not doing that. We're doing this." And I was like, "Oh shoot, okay."
I think I had a couple of those experiences, yeah. So once you go through that once or twice, I think that's when you've officially become a game designer, when you finally realize, okay, we're making one thing. There's one vision that we're all working towards. It's not about me. It's not about my ideas. Maybe some of that, some of the things you have the power to affect in that regard, but mostly, you're working with a whole team of people. You have to respect everyone's, drive to get, the project finished and to a certain quality level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So you go from intern to full time, right? To associate. Was that around the time ESO shipped?
Yeah, I think it was like almost the same month, they brought us on full time. It was a little scary, I was like, oh, I don't know if they're going to bring us on full time. Moving from intern to full time, you don't know if you're going to have a job once your internship's up. You hope you did a good enough job for them to want to keep you, and luckily I did. So it was like the month or the month after that ESO actually released. They came and offered us full time positions, me and a few of the other interns, and of course we accepted. They told us we were going to be moving on to the content team, specifically making encounters. At the time I didn't even really know what an encounter designer was. I had an idea, but they put us on the encounter team under some great leadership at the time, and I was working with a guy named Sean Wicks, who was a fantastic guy. Taught me almost everything I know about encounter design at the time. So that was really eye-opening, moving from doing like systems work to now I'm building encounters and staging enemies in the field and building boss fights and combat packages. So a big leap from systems to Encounter, that's for sure, in terms of what you need to know and how to apply your skills.
Yeah, and sounds like another great opportunity to kind of absorb and learn, more really useful, really, really powerful experience. Yeah.
And at that time too, we were allowed to get our hands on more of the tool set as well, and really get more technical knowledge of how that game was made, and formulate our skills and hone our skills in using that tool set to create some pretty cool stuff. So by the end of my career at ZeniMax, I was able to, I think I had a mastery over a lot of it and was able to make some cool stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. And I guess also you mentioned kind of being a family man, around this time, and intern is not always the most best paid role in the industry. Like, and you had a year of that. Like at that point, I presume you're very much kind of like, hey, this is the dream. I'm trying to pursue the dream, and like I've got to see it through, even if it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, well, I had an amazing wife that was there supporting me, a little help from my parents as well. So, it was just enough to get me through the internship and get a full-time position. And then from there, the dream now begins, right? Once the internship's done. I would say the dream started, when you get the internship, right? Like I said, you walk into the studio the first time, you're kind of starstruck and you're like, holy moly, I'm at ZeniMax Online, I mean, at the time, it probably wasn't the juggernaut that it's known as today, but I'd like to think that I helped get it there.
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. It sounds like you played a key role in a huge, a huge product that really put the studio on the map. So, and like you say, intern kind of has comes with that element of trepidation, right? Like I'm loving this work, but it might go away, right? So, getting that transition to full time, is a huge moment in your life, I'm sure, and the life of your family.
Yeah, I mean, it helped greatly. The pay for internship versus a full time position is, there's a big difference there. So getting paid to do what you love is pretty awesome for sure.
Definitely. And then you mentioned kind of going on to the content team. So at this point, you're kind of working in live service, right? The game is out, and you are expanding and building on it, and presumably taking a lot of feedback from the community now as well. Like, that must have been an interesting experience.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback was kind of fed. I mean, of course, we'd be able to read forums and understand it, but the actionable feedback was, it would come from directors and leadership, and so they'd filter that down to us, and we'd talk about how we're going to address that and how moving forward we might change our designs to maybe meet the feedback and address what the players want. I'd say at the time, ZeniMax Online was very open to, hearing community feedback, and, the initial release of Elder Scrolls Online wasn't, it wasn't a fantastic release. It wasn't, people weren't ranting and raving initially. There was a lot of people that loved the game, a lot of people that kind of felt it was okay. So I think a lot of the conversations at the time were, okay, how do we make this what people are expecting and what people are going to love? So we really listened to the community. I listened to my leadership and directors, and we acted on that feedback, and I think we turned it into something pretty amazing by the end. Yeah.
And you mentioned kind of the tool set, that you're sort of getting deeper into the tool set now. You mentioned kind of working in the Elder Scrolls tool set, at college. Was there a lot of overlap with the ESO tool set, or was it very bespoke?
No, the ESO tool set was its own, custom tool set. So very different from at the time when I was working on Elder Scrolls in a modding capacity. It was the Skyrim creation kit, which is not multiplayer at all, as opposed to moving into an engine that's focused around being multiplayer. Very eye-opening, and you learn a lot about client-server relationships and how multiplayer actually functions. So
true. The Schrodinger's cat of video game design, as I always call it. Right, everything in multiplayer exists in multiple states at multiple times. Yeah, that's another fascinating element, right? Is not only have you jumped into an issue, or not only have you jumped into an MMO in a big studio, in a big franchise, but you've also got that multiplayer element that just changes the entire makeup of what you build and how you build it, right? So
affects everything in what you're doing. All of a sudden you got to think about 4 or 5 different angles. Even just something just like encounter design, just approaching an enemy, right? You got to think about all the different ways that different players get approached from, and what problems those may pose, and how you can create solutions to those issues. So
talk to me about kind of learning that process, right? Like you were a multiplayer fan, you played multiplayer games, but playing them and then making them, there's a big leap there. Like, how did you find that transition, sort of shifting your mindset into that?
I mean, it wasn't easy. Playing multiplayer games as opposed to making them like, I think as you kind of just said is a very different experience, right? Playing them, you don't really care about, what the other people's experience around you is for the most part. You're really just focusing on your own. But when you're designing for multiplayer video games, you really have to, play test continually and try to find every little angle that players might try to play your game from. With however many players might be around you, is it just you? Is it just a single player in a multiplayer environment, or are there 30 different players running in this? How that affects balance, how it affects, narrative. Every little aspect of video game design is affected by, as soon as you stick an additional player in there, there's a plethora of things that you need to start thinking about.
Yeah, well, bets are off. Yeah, so you move into the encounter designer role for real, officially, if you like, and stay in that role for for some time. Talk to me about kind of encounter design. Like, what was it that you really enjoyed, and how did you feel your skills kind of grew over that time in terms of understanding that role?
Sure. Encounter design, I mean, generally, I think most people think of encounter design as, the moment-to-moment gameplay and combat with NPCs. I kind of approached it as more of like a visual storytelling way. So what I love, with my in my youth, loving to level design and make little games on paper, I love visual aspects of things. So what I really loved was like telling stories visually and setting up NPCs to tell a visual story without even using words. Like, a player can approach an encounter and understand what they're doing, understand what story is being told just through that. And luckily for me, loving doing that type of thing, setting up and staging scenes and visual storytelling. Elder Scrolls Online was very heavily, invested in that type of thing, right? Like, we really wanted to tell narrative and story, and a lot of time, one thing I learned in college was, show, don't tell. So a lot of times you can communicate a lot of cool things without using a single word. So my love for encounter design, in addition to making cool, fun boss fights and gameplay mechanics and that sort of thing, was really like setting up and staging NPCs to look and feel cool in their surrounding environment.
Yeah, so you spend a lot of time kind of not only how you approach it, but also how it plays out, right? Like how, the staging throughout the experience and how that continues to tell that story that you set up at the beginning, yeah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not only for just single encounters either, but, strings of encounters through a level, and how those evolve and what stories they can contribute to each other as a player plays through a level or a dungeon, and how those relate to the overall narrative and how they help reinforce the narrative of the game as players are swinging through. I think it's really fun for me to do.
Yeah, and do you correlate that satisfaction to anything outside of games that you do, right? Is there anything similar that you do that isn't in the industry that's like, oh yeah, that's kind of similar to that staging or that?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I mean, whenever I'm out in the backyard, doing yard work or anything like that, I try to relate stuff to making video games. I take pleasure in designing things in the real world too. So just mowing the lawn and setting up yard stuff in a way that's aesthetically pleasing, I guess, kind of hits those marks a little bit. I guess that's a little staging skills in there as well,
and anything, certainly for me, like playing with my kids and kind of setting up, dioramas and things for them to play with, right? Sometimes that can.
That's a good point, actually. We with the Adventures with Robots, we programmed Legos, of course. I have older kids, and I also have a 4-year-old now, so I'm back to the Lego playing for sure. So, as you said, getting in there and building something with Legos and pulling out your childhood imagination for a 4-year-old and, making sound effects and flying around. Yeah. Some of that definitely helps with, not only being a dad, but also in your creative aspirations, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it sort of speaks to maybe why you get the satisfaction out of doing that professionally, right? Is that it sounds like it's sort of in your DNA to kind of, yeah, do that storytelling, right, and make those things up. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So what, over 11 years at ZeniMax. Why? I mean, obviously ZeniMax was the first place you got your professional start. Like, why did you stay there for so long? What was it about ZOS that just kept you there?
It was great people. The process was great. It was rigorous. At the time we were releasing like 4 releases for ESO a year, which is pretty aggressive for any video game. But we had great people. I was leading not leading. I wasn't the leader of the. I wasn't the lead, I should say, of the Encounter team, but I was the product owner. Towards the end of my time, so I was helping again. I was almost like back in college with a bunch of other designers under my wing and leading them a certain direction. Basically the reason I stayed there so long was just, the people, the process of making the game. And I loved the game too. I loved, again, going back to that visual storytelling, setting up encounters, almost playing like G.I. Joes, but in the Elder Scroll world, setting them up and using the tools to create stuff that gives players wow moments and entertains players. Setting up things in the game that I would like to see as a player too. Like I can I'd go through a level and envision what I'd want to see in terms of encounters in the level, and I think what would I think would be cool as I'm going through this place, and then setting those things up in the game and bringing them to life per se. That was just super fun and satisfying. So that helped me stay there for so long, and yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of getting really proficient with the tools as well. That's always when I was at Sony for like 17 years, and there is an element of like you sort of become the de facto expert in certain angles of the tool set, and that can always be a really satisfying. As new people come on board, you kind of, oh yeah, this is how you do it, and here's the little tricks. That's always a fun part of the job as well.
Right. Yeah. Towards the end of my stay at ZeniMax, I found myself. I used to be the intern, and then I had interns under me that I was working with, showing them how to use the tools, and it was amazing, like how much you can actually learn from teaching others how to use things. So as I'd teach more people how to use the tools, I'd find little things that I didn't know, and honed my tool set that way. So by the end, we were taking the tools to, as far as we could take them, and we were pushing out content so fast there wasn't often a lot of time to, get engineering support for encounters or anything like that. So we had to take the tools that we had and really push them to a level that would make things seem new and exciting. So we could make some stuff using existing technology. Just by manipulating it in certain ways and make new mechanics for ESO and new experiences in ESO doing that.
Yeah, talk to me about that, because that's always something that I've kind of enjoyed, right, is being able to make the tools do something that people go, wait, you made it do that? Like, how did you do that? And like there is a certain amount, when you've been in a tool set for a long time, there's a certain point where that just starts to happen naturally. You just start bending it in ways no one ever thought it could go.
Yeah, using certain aspects of the engine to do things that they're not meant to do. Like there's an ability system in the ESO engine that, I'd like to tell people you can do anything with this as long as you're willing to put in the time, So we were able to take that system and really make whole encounter experiences almost just from using the ability system. So we pretty much took that to its extreme. At that point in time, we were making some pretty awesome things. Like I worked on one of the lead designers for the Harrowstorm World event. We ended up making a wandering world boss for our Deadlands release, which is just a boss that wanders around a giant multiplayer environment, which was a whole can of worms. So we did those things, again, taking those tools to the next level, taking them to as far as we could possibly take them, seeing what things we could do with the tools to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, that's cool. And you talked about kind of 4 releases a year. That's quite an aggressive cadence, and probably, I'm guessing, led to a certain amount of fairly predictable pressure throughout a year. Like, how did that affect you? How did that affect your family? Like, how did you balance the needs of those pushes to get those out, but also, balancing life and sort of balancing, your job with your home life?
Well, at first, when we started the 4 releases a year, I was still pretty early in my career, so I still had that, that desire to really, if I work, the harder I work, the further I'll get, which is true to an extent, of course. But there's the phrase "work smarter, not harder," right? Which is something that, I think I learned as my career went on. But at first, it was pretty hard. You had to work a lot of hours. They didn't, just voluntary. They didn't require us to put in crunch or anything at the time. But I wanted my stuff to look and feel as cool as possible, so I'd put in extra hours making those things happen. But by the time, as my time at ZeniMax approached an end, we were the team I was working with, we had all been there for, a decade or so with each other. So we knew how to work together. We knew what we needed to do to push these releases out the door and get them to a certain quality level, So by the end of it, we were pretty much pros in making content for ESO, and I don't want to say it was easy towards the end to get the content out, but we definitely had a process, a solidified process, and were able to make things in, cooler things in a faster amount of time, or a shorter amount of time, I should say.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important part of, when a team stays together for a long period of time, especially in the same tool set, like how efficient and effective and how much you can get done, right? When when you all know how to work together and you all really know how the tools work and how the game works as well.
Yeah, I was still, some of the other people that were there a little longer than me, and even people that weren't there as long as I was, were doing some amazing things with the tools. So we're, again, constantly learning too, and watching, seeing what other people can make and what other people's ideas are, and feeding off those, and taking that and adding your spin to it. It was a big aspect to design at Sauce. So seeing what other people were making, and recreating it and updating it in cool ways.
Yeah, and be inspired by each other.
The talent there at the time was insane. A lot of the other people that worked there at the time, I would just look at what they were making and be like, "Holy moly, how can I do that? Like, show me how to do that. That's really cool." Right?
Yeah, that's great. It's such a exciting place to be when you've got a team that's really firing on all cylinders. So you were at ZOS for 11 years, just over 11 years. Why did you move on?
I'm not sure. I kind of look back, and I think I was just ready for a change. I had worked in the engine for so long, and I did love the engine. I loved working in the engine, but I was looking towards the future, and I was kind of thinking, all right, well, what do I need to do to keep my career going? Is there something I need to learn? How can I go to that next step, that next level of game design? And so what I decided to do is I just kind of sat back, at night I'd get off work, and instead of playing video games or anything, I'd actually jump on Unreal Engine. I spent like 2 or 3 years just doing Unreal Engine tutorials, learning everything I could possibly learn about Unreal Engine. I just picked that as the thing I wanted to learn, and where I thought might be the next best place for my career. And so I was able to make some cool stuff using Unreal, encounters and like fantasy levels, and I went back into world building a little bit and started doing level design. Udemy was a big help, so I just jumped on Udemy and purchased some courses and went through those courses, learned gas. So I spent those years just learning everything I could possibly understand about Unreal Engine, so that I could take my career to the next place. Just take that next step and find a new adventure, essentially.
Yeah, and that's cool because I mean, ZOS had been your only place for that long, so it makes a lot of sense that you kind of felt like you needed to go try somewhere else, right? But you were balancing your kind of day job with home learning for a while. That must have been tough.
Yeah, but it wasn't like, again, you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right? So, it was work during the day, work, but, you're making Elder Scrolls Online. It's awesome. It's fun. There are work, there are hard parts to it, of course, but, then at night, sometimes I'd be almost more excited to get off and jump on Unreal Engine and learn new things, right? Especially at the time, Gas was brand new and under Unreal Engine. And so that was the next big thing that I saw coming up. And I was like, I need to learn Gas just so I have knowledge. I want to be able to make cool things in Unreal Engine. Gas is probably the next best place to do it. So that was kind of what I focused on, in addition to learning everything else that I could.
Remind me what gas is again? I've
The
forgotten.
gameplay ability system.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, I remember now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that was a good sort of opportunity to expand your skill set there. And I'm guessing you were sort of correlating a lot of what you understood about how you made stuff in Elder Scrolls with the and the Elder Scrolls engine, ESO engine with the Unreal toolset. Yeah, sort of comparing the two.
It was pretty interesting. Like once I really got more technical with Unreal Engine, I started remembering, what I used to do in the ESO engine. And when I was working on ESO, I kind of took the tools for granted. Um, you know, um, and then I started learning Unreal Engine. And I look back on ESO, I was like, wow, that engine was actually pretty robust and pretty amazing with what it could do. That's not to say anything bad about Unreal Engine, but it was just comparing the two engines at the time and not understanding that what I was working on with ESO was pretty amazing. It kind of came to light once I really got into Unreal Engine. Both engines fantastic, very different in many ways, but there were some similar aspects as well. Like Gas is almost it's very similar to the ability system that was already existing in Elder Scrolls Online, and Unreal Engine had it, a couple years later. So ESO had a leg up in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. So you're kind of day jobbing on ESO, and then you're learning Unreal at night, and then you make the decision to move on from ZOS. Was that related to where you sort of felt you were in Unreal at that point?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes and no. I kind of felt like I had a good, skill set in Unreal at the time, and I was looking for the next adventure. I wasn't tired of ESO or anything like that. I just really wanted to, I wanted to take that next step and really learn, game design from a different perspective. There was a few different studios that I was looking at. Of course, Skeleton Key was the highest one on my list. Fortunately for me, applied and went through the process with them, and great team.
Yeah, that's cool, and I mean, I can relate to that. I mean, I spent 11 years at one studio as well, and when I moved from Sony in the UK to Sony Santa Monica, it was like, I don't know if I'm any good. I've only worked at one place. I got no barometer, right? Like, no disrespect to the studio I was at, but like, I don't know. Like, until I go somewhere else, I can't even tell if I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from in that regard as well, because working on ESO, which is obviously multiplayer, massively multiplayer, role playing third person, to something that's narrative, at the time, big change, a lot of learning in regards to switching genres of games as well.
Yeah, for sure. So talk to me a little bit about your kind of gaming habits. You've been in the industry now for what, 13, 14 years or so. Has it changed the way you play video games?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if it has or not. I do find myself playing games and being able to recognize, issues with the game or artifacts with how the design or the engine, works. I'd like to think I'm better at them because I know how they're made, but that's probably not true anyway. I've been playing a lot of Deadlock lately and getting my butt kicked, so I got to be humble in that regard, I guess.
Yeah. But in general, you're sort of still able to kind of play games and enjoy games for what they are and not pick them apart at every turn.
Yeah, well, I don't spend my nights anymore, learning Unreal Engine. I'll probably, get back into personal projects again in the near future, but I do find time to play at night, after the young one's in bed and enjoy myself. So it's still how I enjoy my time when I'm not making video games, for sure.
And what about, kind of sounds like, you grew up in the industry, right? To a certain extent, and obviously you had a family that was growing alongside you too. Do they kind of relate to what you do? Do they have kind of insight in what you do? Do they have passion for what you do?
Well, my both of my older kids are big gamers. They're both. My son's about to graduate from Penn State, so he's not a kid, I should say. He's a grown man, and he loves playing video games. My daughter's actually going to school. She's going to go to Penn State and go to computer science because she has a big interest in what I do, and she's more narrative driven. She's going down the storytelling pathway, which is great for her. So I'm kind of guiding her through that process and helping her understand, what it might be like to have to break into the industry, how you need to be prepared and what you need to do.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So one of your kids very much inspired by your profession.
Yeah, both of my older kids are huge gamers, though, for
Right.
sure.
Yeah. And both huge gamers. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
My youngest is only 4, so not quite there yet, but he likes to sit next to me and watch me. Got to be careful what I put on, of course.
Yes. Yeah. I had the same thing with my kids too. Cool. And then you mentioned you kind of brother, the brother that kind of inspired you still plays, but maybe not as much. Do you ever swap stories about, what it's like to make games with them, or does he show any interest in it, or?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really show much interest in the design side of things, but we used to play a lot of multiplayer competitive games together, so we kind of giggle and laugh at old memories playing things like Gears of War or the old Crisis 2. The heydays of my before design career was when we really used to play together. So it's fun to reminisce about times we spent gaming, not only as adults but as when we were kids as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Nice to have those stories. And then if you weren't making games, Brandon, what would you be doing?
That's actually a great question, and it's a question I try to ask people also when I interview them. So kudos for that one. I think I would be going into the aerospace field. I'd love to maybe fly. Yeah, flight, aerospace, flying airplanes, space itself. I probably would have done something. Looked to that type of career field, but I just love games too much. I don't know.
Interesting. Is that sort of space or flight, has that been kind of another passion then, that's sort of grown up alongside video games?
Yeah, I've always had just like a passing interest in physics, and I don't have a formal education or anything like that. Definitely a layman in that regard, but I've always had an interest in flight. I have really good eyesight, so I'm physically capable of doing something like that, but
Do you think there's any overlap there in terms of, what the passion you get out of making video games? Do you think you would kind of find a similar passion in that field too, or would it be entirely different, do you think?
I think for that it's more the act of actually, for like aerospace, like actually flying something and through physical space, right? That's probably much different. I've played a couple of video games that are similar to that. Like I had a crushing addiction to Elite Dangerous for a couple of years, and that's a space flight simulation game. So, that might be the biggest place where those two interests overlap.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I guess sort of, having had a long career in video games that continues, what do you think you've learned about yourself by becoming a game developer?
Probably, I mean, there's been a lot of lessons, a lot of hard to learn lessons. I think the biggest thing about myself is to know when to be humble, I think. I always looked at, big name game designers as like these, almost superstars in the industry. I've always looked at the industry as like the almost, Hollywood-esque type deal with big names and stuff. But, there's for every, creative director, big name creative director, there's, 50 designers underneath that also deserve recognition, right? So I've always just tried to be humble, especially later in my career, in terms of what we're making and going back to like, working with a team and everyone working towards a common goal. Like a lot of teamwork things I've learned in the years and how to, be part of a team and again, work with people to make something cool.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. Like if I look back on myself like 15, 20 years ago, I'm like, oof, like there was definitely some ego stuff going on there that I needed to shake pretty fast and had some slaps in the face that I think fixed it.
Yeah, so I mean that's one thing I'd say to all people trying to break into the industry or people new in the industry, put that ego aside and really, work alongside people and work with people to create things that are cool and not just don't focus on yourself, but focus on the team mentality and the team aspect.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I'm sure you've experienced this, working on a project like ESO for so long is there are some big failures, right? You can have some big moments where you're like, oof, we whiffed on that or we whiffed on this thing. And those really help you to kind of really help ground you and help give you the perspective.
Yeah, and there's a few things too, like I would make, and I was like, "Oh, players are gonna love this. This is gonna be the coolest thing ever. I'm gonna see all these comments on the threads and boards about people how much these things are awesome," and then they'd release and not a peep. And so you got to expect things like that. And then other things that I didn't think were super amazing or incredible, people would rant and rave about and love to talk. So you know hearing people's satisfaction on anything that you're a part of is a huge you know it puts a smile on your face for sure.
Yeah, is that why you do it, Brandon? For that satisfaction, or the external praise, or is it very internally driven? Do you think?
I'd say it's more internally driven. I want to just create cool things and tell cool stories, and if other people get pleasure and think that that's cool, that just makes it even that much better. But I get satisfaction of being successful in making things that I think are cool. And if I'm able to make things that I think are cool, regardless of what other people generally. Obviously things need to be successful, and this is a business. So in that regard. But as long as I'm able to create things that I think are cool and hit the marks in terms of what I think the players might like. I'm generally satisfied. And then if other people say it's awesome and love it as well, then again, that just makes it even that much cooler, right?
Yeah, I love that. Completely agree. I think that's a great way of looking at it. And to your point, not necessarily a perspective you have when you first get started, but a really important one to learn as soon as you can. Well, yeah, thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate the time. It's great to get to know you. Great to understand your journey. I think you hit on a lot of the things, especially that point about, right, there being lots of people behind, the creative directors and the big names that you hear about. That's really the reason why I do this podcast. So I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you sharing your story, and it was great to meet you and great to get to know you.
Yeah, you as well, Alex. Thank you a lot.